When a community is hurting, how does a leader even begin to help? Sometimes the best guide is someone who's already walked a similar path. We're going to dive into this really powerful lesson from the book of Lamentations. It's all about a mentor who uses their own story of suffering to give a voice back to a community that's completely lost theirs.
So let's start with a huge question. One I think we've all asked ourselves at some point. How can past wounds possibly heal present pain? I mean, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? But believe it or not, this ancient text from the book of Lamentations gives us a really powerful answer. It shows us how old scars can actually become a map, a guide for getting through new crises.
All right, so the hero of our story is this figure called the wounded healer. And I want you to forget any idea of a perfect leader who's never felt pain. That's not this person. Not at all. This is someone who has been deeply wounded, who has the scars to prove it, and has somehow made it through to the other side. And here's the key. They don't use that experience to preach from on high. No way. They get right down in the muck with their community and basically say, look, I've been there. Let me show you how I talked to God when I was at my lowest.
Okay, so to really get why this whole wounded healer thing is so important, we have to understand what the community is going through. And it's bad. We're talking about the survivors of the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem back in 586 BC. I mean, just try to imagine it. Their homes, gone. Their families, torn apart. Their entire world has just been turned into rubble. And they are completely paralyzed by this storm of emotions they have no idea how to even begin to bring to God.
So the scholar Dr. Leslie Allen points out that their pain is really a mix of three different things. First, you've got grief. And this is just that raw, overwhelming sorrow for everything and everyone they've lost. Then there's guilt. You know that little voice in your head? They're hearing it loud and clear, wondering, did we deserve this? Did our sins bring this on ourselves? And then, and this is so important, there's grievance. This is a white-hot anger at their enemies. Because these guys weren't just conquerors, they were cruel, just for the sake of being cruel. So the whole community is just stuck. They're trapped at this three-way intersection of pain, totally unable to move.
Now, what's really interesting is that these different emotions, well, they lead to totally different kinds of prayers. A prayer that comes from guilt, that one looks inward. It's all about, God, I messed up, I have sinned. It's about taking responsibility. But a prayer of grievance, that's a whole different beast. It looks outward. It screams, God, they did this to me. They wronged me. It's a demand for justice. And our wounded healer is smart. He sees this community just drowning in this feeling of injustice, and he realizes, you know what? That grievance prayer, that might be the only prayer they can actually bring themselves to say right now.
To make this a little more real, Dr. Allen tells this incredibly powerful story from when he was a hospital chaplain. He's talking to this man who was just in so much pain. And the first thing the man talks about is his grief. His family abandoned him. But then he explains why. They cut him off because he married a Mexican woman. And in the way he told the story, you could just hear this guilt, as if he'd done something wrong. So you see, grief, guilt, and grievance all wrapped up together in one person's story. It's a perfect example of how messy and complex our pain really is.
So, how does the mentor help? What's his big move? Well, he doesn't give them a lecture, he doesn't preach a sermon, he gives them a testimony. It's like he cracks open his own personal prayer journal and says, hey, let me tell you about a time I was unjustly attacked, and here's exactly how I yelled at God about it. He's giving them a model, a script they can use for their own grievance.
His prayer. It's basically a story about two different crises, but with the same enemies. First up, there was a physical attack. We're talking brutal, life-threatening stuff. He was hunted down, thrown in a pit, and just left for dead. But then, after God steps in, a new crisis starts. And this time, the attack is verbal. It's just this constant barrage of mockery, taunts, and people plotting against him. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones you can't even see.
And the way he describes this first attack, wow, it is so visceral. You can almost feel it. He talks about being hunted like a bird, thrown into a cistern, which is basically a deep, dark well, and then having a stone lid slammed on top, trapping him. He describes the water closing over his head. I mean, these aren't just details. They're metaphors for being completely and totally trapped, so much so that you can't even breathe. He needs God and the community listening in to feel every ounce of his despair.
But then, right there at the absolute bottom of the pit, everything changes. The mentor reminds God of this moment. He says, you came near when I called on you. You said, do not fear. This is huge, a direct, personal response from God. The mentor is essentially showing the community, see,
I took my complaint, my grievance, straight to God, and right when things were at their worst, He showed up. He answered. What a powerful reason for them to try doing the same thing, right?
Okay, so right after remembering this incredible rescue, the mentor uses one single word. But this word, man, it is packed with centuries of meaning and hope for his people. The word is redeem, and it's the key that connects his personal crisis to their entire national story.
So that word is redeem. And you got to understand, originally this was a very specific real-world term. It described the duty of your next of kin, like your closest relative, to step in and rescue you if you were in a crisis. Like if you fell into debt or were sold into slavery, it was their job to buy you back. At its core, it's all about family taking care of their own.
And what's so cool is how this idea grows over time. It starts as a simple family duty, right? But then, during the exodus from Egypt, it gets applied to the entire nation. Suddenly, God is the divine next of kin. He's like Uncle Yahweh, who steps in to redeem all of Israel from slavery. And then later, during the very exile this community is living through, the prophets pick up that same language to promise a second exodus. So when our mentor says, "You redeemed my life," he's not just talking about himself. He is tapping into this massive reservoir of history, reminding everyone that this is who God is. It is in his very character to step in and rescue his family.
All right, so let's tie this all together. What's the final lesson here? Why does this one very personal prayer, a prayer based on grievance, matter so much for this completely broken community?
Here's the bottom line. Of all the ways you can pray, out of grief or guilt or grievance, that prayer of grievance is often the most honest, the most accessible first step for people who feel like they've been wronged. When you are just consumed with anger at what other people have done to you, it's the most direct path back to even talking to God.
And this model, man, it just works. It works because it tells the community that their anger is valid, that it's okay to bring that raw, ugly emotion to God. It gives them permission to scream for justice. It hands them a script for those times when the pain is so bad, you literally don't have the words. And maybe most important of all, it has that little piece of hope baked right in, a real example of God showing up and saying, "Do not fear." Look, a grievance prayer isn't the end of the conversation with God, not by a long shot. But for this community, it's a powerful, powerful way to start it again.
So what this ancient text does is pretty radical. It reframes grievance. It's not just being bitter or holding a grudge. It's a form of prayer, a raw, honest demand for justice that you take straight to God. And that, of course, leaves us with a pretty big question for today, doesn't it? If demanding justice is a legitimate, maybe even necessary, form of prayer, how should we be voicing our grievances now? In our own lives and, as a society?